Since 1904, the garden of the Royal Horticultural Society at Wisley in Surrey has proved a mecca for all those interested in flower, vegetable, fruit and tree. The RHS itself was founded nearly 2 centuries ago, and since then has informed, instructed and improved gardeners and gardening on every continent. The sum of all the knowledge that's been gleaned can be seen in the Society's own breathtaking garden. This video and its 3 companion videos will follow the 4 seasons and, like Wisley itself, be both beautiful and instructional. Gentle spring has gone and now makes way for a sturdier season, summer.
Our England is a garden that is full of stately views, of borders, beds and shrubberies, and lawns and avenues, with statues on the terraces and peacocks strutting by. But the glory of the garden lies in more than meets the eye.
The approach of summer brings an air of expectation to the Royal Horticultural Society's gardens at Wisley. The preparation which has gone on all year long and which reached its climax during spring is now over. The carefully laid plans and the hard work of the Wisley experts to convert those plans into reality now await that most fickle of seasonal visitors, the British summer sun. There's always colour to be found in the gardens, the golds of autumn, the tough greens of winter, the gentle hues of spring. But summer uses nature's palette with abandon. The rays of the sun transform the canvas that is Wisley into its full glory, a glory that few artists, save nature itself, could ever hope to reproduce.
With the abundance of spring now past, Wisley moves into summer mode, typified by the colourful and varied herbaceous plants in the broad borders, by the sumptuous lilies on Battleston Hill, and by the vivid displays of delphiniums and sweet peas in the Trials Field. Elsewhere, the model fruit gardens, awash with succulent strawberries, gooseberries and raspberries, provide encouragement, and not a little temptation, for visitors to try to achieve similar results. Whilst in the model vegetable garden, standard methods of growing quality vegetables are accompanied by demonstrations of cultivating crops in limited areas. Scientific investigation, education, and conservation matters all form an important part of our work, each contributing to the Society's aims of achieving horticultural excellence in all that it does. Many other facets of Wisley are less obvious. The advisory staff help visitors with their gardening problems and provide information on virtually any aspect of gardening. In summertime, Wisley is like a continuous flower festival, a place for people to enjoy and admire its ever-changing beauty and to add to their own skills and knowledge of this, to me, most fascinating of leisure activities.
The sun may be the first of the summer's visitors, but hard on its heels comes the public, eager to see the wonders that have been worked this year in the gardens. The visitors, more than 600,000 a year, are a vital element in making Wisley a living place. True, there's much groundbreaking scientific work that goes on behind the scenes, but Wisley on display is an example and an inspiration to gardeners throughout the British Isles and much further beyond. from the gardeners of the future, whose first visit to Wisley will open their eyes to the myriad possibilities of flower, plant form and fruit, to the more seasoned royal horticulturist, whose avowed aim is to leave behind gardens that generations to come will cherish. One of the most common cries to be heard from visitors to Wisley is, "Why don't mine grow like that?" As if the gardeners at Wisley have some special alchemy possessed by no one else. True, there are generations of expertise at Wisley, but that expertise is openly available. This is the lair of the horticultural detectives, who are backed up by the century-long accumulated archive of knowledge of the RHS. Every day, the problems and the pitiful results of the problems pour in.
Well, there's about anything you can ever imagine. We don't get any of the healthy stuff here. We get all the plants which are breathing their last and are oozing and sliming and rotting and falling apart generally. We get everything that no one else wants to touch, really, because we deal with all those plant diseases and disorders and things. It's one a very sad bit of Hypericum that's got rust, quite a common disease, and it's the sort of thing which we get a lot of queries on during the summer months because warm weather and at the moment damp weather as well. And so there are lots of things like that. In the total, throughout the year, I would think we're talking about 4,000 letters and parcels, and then about the same amount, same number as far as visitors and phone inquiries are concerned. We get lots of people coming in with samples when they come to visit the gardens as well. So probably about sort of 9,000 in total.
The team here have been likened to forensic scientists or GPs whose diagnosis is always difficult.
It's a total exactly like being a GP, really, because you get all the bits of misery and the sadness of everything going wrong, and everyone who writes in is great because they really want to know the answer, but at the same time it's something that's really, really bothering them. So yes, it's just like being a GP, and you have to be very careful how you answer people's questions as well, so they know you're sympathetic to them. But, very sad thing, a piece of hormone weed killer on a totally unrecognisable tomato. During the summer, everyone's out killing the weeds in their lawns, and of course as soon as they go and do that, they get the weed killer in the wrong places in the garden as well, and tomatoes are very, very prone and makes these horrible, thickened, swollen growths and peculiar shaped tomatoes at the end. And again, we get lots of that sort of thing in the summer. I think it's very well used, and I think it's very important because I'm keen to encourage people to understand a little bit more about the darker side of gardening, which is what I'm into.
It's not just dead or dying plants that are sent to Wisley by grieving gardeners. Sometimes it's a flying and crawling army that can prove unstoppable. The recipients of small brown packages in the entomology lab are never quite sure what they're about to receive, except that usually the contents will be alive and, perhaps most interestingly, sometimes hitherto unrecorded. Today, no surprises. Fine examples of lily beetles from someone's garden. It's a particularly difficult pest to control, first recorded 50 years ago. It's a pest that's become the bane of flower gardeners within the last few years. Wisley has done much to popularise integrated pest control. Instead of reliance on chemicals, other more natural ways are being endorsed to help the gardener. Simply put, it's using a bug to catch a bug. Wisley's entomology department has a comprehensive database of the world's insects and what they can eradicate.
Came here first time about 10 or 12 years ago. I was very pleased to see it then, a new record for the garden.
This knowledge is passed on to students and is proving highly popular as our worries about using purely chemical answers to solve gardening problems increase. The integrated solution uses natural, cultural, and slightly adapted biological methods of eradication. As a last resort, some chemicals that do least to harm the environment are used. The scientists at Wisley are the first to acknowledge that they're relearning methods that nature knew all along, and that so-called modern methods have caused as many problems as they solved.
These days, particularly things like whitefly and red spider mite have often gained resistance to the chemicals available to amateur gardeners, and this means you have to look to alternative means of control. have here an example of red spider mite. It's something which affects a very wide range of plants. It causes a fine pale speckling of the upper leaf surface, and in heavy attacks you'll find leaves going yellow and dropping off, and you may also get a fine silk webbing spreading between the leaves and the stems. The biological control which is available for this is a little predatory mite. This is something which is put onto the plants. It then runs around searching for eggs and active stages of the red spider mite, which it then eats. Another important pest is glasshouse whitefly, which again attacks many plants. It feeds by sucking sap, and it excretes a sugary liquid called honeydew, which makes the plant sticky, and also allows the growth of black sooty moulds, which spoils its appearance. The biological control available for this is a little parasitic wasp, something called Incarsia formosa. This lays its eggs in the immature scale stage of the whitefly's life cycle, and you can see how well your parasite is doing because the parasitized scales turn black. So you can turn over a leaf and you can see the proportion of black to healthy yellowish white scales and see how the parasite is doing. This is often sold in the form of little cards like this. You buy a strip and you tear this off and then hang it up on your plant. The parasites are in here, this area here. There's lots of little black parasitized scales stuck on there. And within a few days of placing this in your greenhouse, the adult parasites will emerge and they'll start laying eggs in the immature stages. The other pest is mealybug. Again, a sap-feeding pest. Again, it produces honeydew and sooty mold. It's difficult to control because it covers itself in a waxy material which helps to repel sprays, and also it likes to live in relatively inaccessible places on the plant, like leaf axils, where the sprays don't penetrate too well anyway. The biological control for this is a little ladybird, something which has come from Australia and the Far East, something called Cryptolemus montruseri. The interesting feature about this ladybird is that the larvae look more like a mealybug than the pest itself. It looks like a giant mealybug, and you can see some of these here on the leaf. This leaf has gone yellow with age. It's not the effects of the mealybug feeding. So if you're going to use this type of predator, you need to be aware of this. Otherwise, you simply think your mealybugs are getting bigger and stronger day by day.
Nature heals itself, and nowhere is that more evident at Wisley than Battleston Hill. Devastated by a series of violent storms that laid it almost bare, it's slowly but reassuringly returning to a picture of health, albeit in a very different guise. Out of the original loss has come an opportunity that hasn't been missed by the RHS. A Mediterranean garden has taken hold on Battleston's southern slope, and it revels in the high heat of summer. For the new residents of the Mediterranean garden, used to more temperate climes, there has to be added protection with heavy mulching using bark and chippings. Wisley's gardeners have used plants tolerant of low moisture, which in these days of water conservation is so important.
I think this is the biggest area of the garden which has been totally redeveloped. There's, other than a few of the mature trees, there's virtually nothing in it which was here 7 or 8 years ago. It's all been done since then. With the storm in '87, it was severely damaged by the winds, and probably we've lost about 75% of the trees which are in here. As the wind went through it, it blew everything over or damaged so badly that it was decided that we'd take it down, and we developed this feature as a result. The whole point of the thing is that it's a very south-facing slope, so it gets extremely hot. Added to that, the whole of Wisley is on the sandy soil, so it gets very hot and dry. But now we've got a lot of plants which really do appreciate the full sun, which is what the rhododendrons which were here originally really didn't want. The cistus flower so freely in the full sun. Added to that, we've now got quite a collection of different phormiums, and some you can see actually with flower spikes coming on them. A wide range of eucalyptus, all of which are proving to be very hardy. And then, of course, there's quite a lot of bulbous stuff as well. We've got freesias here, which are coming through quite well, ixias, brodias, and then things like tigridias, which always make a very colourful splash. The terracing is done with railway sleepers because of the steepness of the slope, so that enables us to be able to grow some of the Zorschnerias and helichrysums, which will tumble down over it and help to disguise the sleepers. But really, it's taken off extremely well, and it's given us a display of colour right the way through the year.
It's highly unlikely that founding members of the RHS would recognise much of the modern Wisley. Fashions in gardening change, as do the functions of places like Wisley. The massive increase of visitors sees to that. And again, the garden has to take into account new plant introductions and techniques. But while Wisley is ever changing, its position of excellence has to be preserved, so alterations to the garden are carefully plotted. Here, the Gardens Committee, with its members drawn from all walks of horticulture, scrutinised design proposals for an alteration to a central area of Wisley. A wrong decision would have an effect well into the future.
Establish acers and magnolias and so on. And I think it's a lovely feature here, particularly now after Jim's done such a good job on returfing. I've never seen the broadwalk grass look as good.
The Gardens Committee has the task of planning and evaluating any major changes. The climb up Battleston Hill leads the visitor on to Portsmouth Field, a 6-acre, gently sloping site that's dedicated to the pursuit of excellence. The Portsmouth Field, so named because the old road to the naval base and Nelson's Victory is nearby, is the main outdoor trials area of Wisley. And victory in this highly competitive age of gardening is what Wisley's trials are all about. This is the testing ground for a whole range of new varieties of vegetables and flowers that seek the approval of the Royal Horticultural Society's trials committees. There can be more than 2,500 entries in any one year, with often more than 30 different crops. Seeds and plants are sent in by national and international companies, as well as professional and amateur growers from all over the world, all seeking the coveted RHS Award of Garden Merit. It's not easy to come by. The committees of long standing compare new varieties with tried, tested, approved and established cultivars.
We will then call for a raise of hands for everybody who has scored.
Hopefuls must prove to be outstanding before the RHS Mark of Excellence is granted.
And we will then count. If there are 6 or more...
Trials are really fundamental to the whole being of the RHS. When the Society was established in 1804, one of the early aims was to trial plants. So right from the very beginning, when the Society had gardens in Kensington and Chiswick, there was an immediate enthusiasm and involvement in trialling especially ornamental plants, but also vegetable ones as well. And that went on for the first 100 years, and when this garden was given to the Society in 1904 by Hanbury, there were just 60 acres then, but it was already an experimental garden. And part of the trust by which it was handed over to the Society was indeed that it should be continued as a garden for experimental purposes. And all of these trial arrangements are overseen by specialist committees. And they set up, each committee nowadays sets up a system of criteria before it starts its judging. And the committees will then move, usually singly, but sometimes collectively, through each of the entries, endeavouring to identify by consensus sometimes scoring, usually scoring in fact, in order to come near to what they regard as the good doers, those which are in fact worthy of the award of garden merit, which can then be published in seed catalogues and nursery catalogues, and it gives gardeners especially a good measure of what excellent qualities exist in any particular entry. So the gardener who comes to Portsmouth Field has the opportunity to learn something of real value in excellence for his garden, what he may use. But in addition to that, of course, because of the variety of plants which are grown here, it presents a most excellent spectacle.
One of the ever-popular crops in the Portsmouth Field is sweet peas, which are on trial as both cordon and bush forms. Guy Barter is the superintendent.
They'll be looking for length and straightness of stem, colour, whether there's a mixture of colours within each particular cultivar that we have here. They'll be looking for size of the bloom as well, and whether it's an attractive form, the number of flowers, whether they're arranged nicely on the stem. First of all, they'll be judged in situ on the exhibition kinds grown up the canes, and then they'll be judged almost simultaneously as the bush-grown ones. And then when that's done, the committee will head to a glass house where these will be laid out, and they'll examine these and look at them for their cut flower in the vase sort of potential, and judge them on all three aspects: exhibition as a garden ornament and as a cut flower.
Sweet peas, like chrysanthemums, daffodils and dahlias, are on permanent trial in the Portsmouth Field for the very good reason that every year new varieties are introduced, and all seeking the RHS accolade of excellence.
There's not a great deal of commercial interest in sweet peas, either as a seed or as a cut flower. So by providing a meeting place for all the different varieties and assessing them, we're doing a almost unique and, I feel, rather invaluable task.
The commercial link with RHS trials is most evident in the stunning display of Flora Select bedding plants. A relatively small part of the trials field, it's of particular interest during the summer months when the colours are a popular spectacle.
Flora Select basically is a European organisation, and the purpose of it is to test seeds and flowers. And they're based in the Netherlands, and they have these display gardens around, like the one behind me, and it gives us the opportunity to have a look at the individual plants. The plants themselves are awarded gold medals, and Flora Select, on this particular bed, all the varieties are gold medal winners. We try on this display to make sure that none of the colours clash, but it's often very difficult because, as you can see, there's quite a lot of yellows, yellow being a very popular subject. But equally, some of the colours fit in very well. The whites, and particularly with this sort of foliage, fit into any bedding scheme quite easily. And most of them generally fit well with the next cultivar. A plant that perhaps I don't like too much, but that's because I have difficulty fitting it into the bedding scheme because the colours don't harmonise very well. Nevertheless, this little man, Viola Jolly Joker, has become very, very popular with our visitors. And so therefore it's going to be around for a long time, although perhaps it can be difficult to put in other bedding schemes. This display lasts from early June to about the end of September, and I would suggest anybody who comes down to Wisley has a look with a view of taking a few names and of varieties home and trying them out themselves.
The thought in planning and the care in growing, with attention to weeding and watering, result some 6 weeks later in a colourful and eye-catching array. While Flora Select represents the latest thinking in bedding plants, Wisley makes sure that older crafts are kept alive. Ray Waite has been preparing this summer's carpet or tapestry bedding schemes throughout the spring. With the care and attention of an architect using living bricks, Ray uses methods little changed from Victorian times. His art combines the skills of a gardener with the patience of an artisan piecing together an intricate mosaic. Only summer will reveal whether the months of preparation have paid off and the vast number of plants needed will work their magic.
We reckon between 9,000 and 10,000 on this bed, which is about 14.5 feet by 14.5 feet. Hopefully, of course, from the plan it comes into 3D, and one tries to keep that in one's mind when one is planning, bearing in mind contrasting colours, contrasting textures of plants to a certain degree, and certainly, hopefully, to create a balance and a sort of bright effect as is possible using foliage plants.
Ray's centrepiece will include the feathered plumes of the badge of the Prince of Wales, in honour of the special visitor to Wisley this summer. This type of formal presentation isn't to everyone's liking, but no one can deny the painstaking care that goes into combining colour, shape, texture and speed of growth into a multidimensional picture. Like an oil painting that fades with time and needs constant retouching, the Wisley gardeners have to tend their masterpiece with time-consuming care.
What I'm doing is going through each area of different plants and cutting them out to the defined area that they should be in. So I'm keeping them within the confines of the design. It needs to be done once a week. It takes me nearly a whole day every week. If it's not done, then it just becomes a mass of different coloured plants with no strongly defined design there. So the whole point of the thing is lost then. So it's a really labour-intensive part of gardening, but worthwhile, I think. It gives a lot of pleasure to a lot of people.
While bedding plants focus visitors' attention, all around and walked and lounged upon are the Wisley lawns. As highly tended as the hothouse flowers, the lawns, some 60% of the garden, provide the perfect backdrop to the displays. But 600,000 pairs of feet can do untold damage, and Wisley has devised an intensive lawn management programme that protects the greensward. While it isn't pampered, the turf has to be looked after so that visitors have the pleasure of walking on grass and not paving. However, there are some areas where trespass is not forgiven, and these show visitors how beautiful a lawn can look. The Jubilee Arboretum dates back to 1977 and now includes a comprehensive collection of species on its vast site. It's westerly facing and therefore exposed, but tree growth has been greatly improved by windbreaks. Whereas much of the pruning activity takes place in the winter, Frank Harrison needs to undertake some of the work in the summer, like cutting back the basal suckers, shoots at ground level that would eventually compete with the stem of the tree. On a demanding site such as this, it's essential to nurture the trees, to cut away congestion and also competing leader shoots that would stunt a young tree's growth. Frank can see how his youngsters are progressing far better at this time of year, and is able to gauge what remedial work is necessary. Sharp secateurs are vital for making clean cuts that won't leave snags or rough edges. The first advice is that the final tree is only as good as the initial choice that you make, and there are some basic hints. Frank draws special attention to the rights and wrongs of buying trees in containers.
When I'm looking for containerised trees for the Arboretum at Wisley, there are several things I look for. This is a bad example. The roots have grown out the bottom of the pot, they've spiralled round, grown out. When we remove this pot, it's going to tear all those roots off. Also, it's a very big plant for such a small pot. This one also, it's got sucker growth from below the graft union. You've got an old label here which has girdled the stem, which will become a weak point as the tree gets bigger. It's a very poorly balanced tree, too long a stem, very poor branches, and also there's coral spot disease at the top. The fruit on this tree is a clue as to why I would buy it. It's a very healthy tree, good extension growth from this year, well-balanced head, well-spaced branches. The roots also, they haven't started spiralling too badly around the bottom, just reach the edge of the pot. When I'm planting, I tease those out. I'd stake it to about here, and then we've got a lovely tree.
The first care taken in choice and further good management can establish a tree that will be standing tall for many years to come. Annual flowers offer the amateur gardener an opportunity for relatively quick and cheap displays. There's much less to worry about regarding pests and disease, and they provide a comprehensive range of colour and form over a long summer period. But again, the watchword is preparation. What you see at Wisley shows display that has been carefully thought out many months in advance. The segments of bed are sown in shallow drills marked out in different directions to give a natural effect to the patchwork. No matter how careful the seeding, when the young plant's established, there's bound to be overcrowding, so thinning is essential to give a better quality display. Individual plants have got to be given room to show their full potential. Rock plants, like most others in the garden, need to be replenished from time to time. Propagation not only revitalizes, but also increases the gardener's stock. There are many different methods of propagation. Seed sowing and shoot cuttings are well-known techniques, and these methods have been refined at Wisley. Less well known is root cutting, which is appropriate for some special plants, and when demonstrated, it comes within the reach of every gardener.
What we actually need to do now is to get these into pots, but I prefer very deep pots for drainage. People that use shallow containers usually end up with plants rotting, and I've developed this method to actually overcome this. First of all, I use a very fine, sharp grit, probably around about sort of 5-6 millimetre maximum down to to sand. I place it at the bottom and I mound this. I don't put it in flat. The mounding just seems to cause drainage to be improved. There's no waterlogging at the bottom of the pot. This is round about a depth of 2–2.5 inches in the centre and going down to about 1 inch at the side of the pot. Next, I've got a compost I've made. It's fairly gritty. You can actually, with a plant like this, incorporate a very sort of limey grit to actually increase the alkalinity. It does actually keep this type of geranium and many other alpine plants quite happy. This goes in. It isn't actually essential to use the compost. You can actually root straight into sand, sharp sand, but I find that it becomes a bit of a shock for the plant when it's actually potted on. So I put this compost in at this stage. I also find that I can keep the plants growing on in here much longer in the compost rather than if I had it in pure sand or even perlite, as some people tend to use. The depth of the sand is going to be just a little bit deeper than the length of the cutting. And here we have a very good sharp sand. I'll mound this right up and tap it quite a few times. And that takes care of any sinkage that's going to happen. Just lightly tap it down and level off. Now the water we're going to give these cuttings can actually go straight through and out the bottom. We keep replacing that water, and that's quite an important part of the rooting process for some things like we're going to do now. The cuttings of the top growth are inserted just so the actual crown is on the surface. But if you're doing the root cuttings in a separate pot normally, these are, I just place in, just leaving the top 1/8 of an inch showing. It's just important that this top is just showing so it can actually pick up the light. I don't like to bury them. When the actual pan is watered, the sand will run down and the surface of the actual cutting will show. Here we have a few cuttings of the same plant we took a few months ago, probably around about the end of March. Just knock these out, and then you can see the 3 layers: the grit, the compost, and the sand. Just free these up, and you can see the way these are rooted. Got pretty good roots on them. Can hardly break them at the moment. And you can see where they've rooted from where I made the cuts earlier on in the year.
The promised potential of the glasshouse in spring becomes a riot of colour in the summer. Ron Gilkison's special charges are the fuchsias, so popular with amateur gardeners to grow and visitors to Wisley to see. Ron recognises their versatility and broad scope. Introductions seem never-ending, providing pot plants, those ideal for hanging baskets and standards, and all of them popular on the show bench.
I think it's quite an easy plant to grow, and they're I think a very attractive flower, and they're a very popular thing to have in the garden as well as a pot plant. We start by taking cuttings in July, and that's nice young growth from the top. Obviously we've got to be careful not to ruin the display, but we then pot up in September time, and then we pot up again in January into 5-inch pots, and then into the final pots in March.
This is one of more than 200 varieties of fuchsia at Wisley. It's also the oldest, autumnal, introduced in the mid-19th century. Its well-being and that of its cousins has much to do with Wisley's integrated pest control. A combination of Encarsia predators and sprays of soft soap are used against whitefly. Natural control and pesticide working hand in hand. An example of how the dedication of a gardener can create a show of form and colour that's a well-loved feature of Wisley.
Well, they're just so diverse. There's so many of them, and there's so many brilliant colours. You know, to me, they're an excellent flower. I love them.
Celebrated in verse, song and picture, the rose holds a special place in the hearts of gardeners. At Wisley, some sections of the new rose garden are continuously updated, so that there no two summer displays are identical. Here, despite the light Surrey soil, bush and standard, climber and rambler give their very individual salute to summer. Another of the major attractions for summer visitors to Wisley is the model fruit garden with its breathtaking variety. But the RHS gardeners are fighting a constant battle to maintain a standard that is world-renowned, because while summer may be the time of harvest, it's also the time of pressure from pests and diseases. The fruit garden is where integrated pest control is also put to the test. Here we see a pheromone trap, which releases a chemical that attracts moths of particularly voracious predator types, such as codling. Yes, a chemical is used, but beneficially. It allows RHS scientists to predict the periods of highest activity of female moths. It's only at these peaks that chemical spray is used. Minimum spraying to maximum effect. The quest for perfectly sound fruit is unceasing. This area of the model fruit garden demonstrates to the visitor yet another way to avoid wholesale spraying. All these varieties are specifically selected for their resistance to diseases like mildew and scab. Whatever the method used, the effect is clearly evident at Wisley. A bountiful and wide variety of fruits that any gardener can grow and be proud of. With such an abundance of fruit, regular and careful picking is essential. And to maintain the productivity of fruits, it's beneficial to have some summer pruning. Jenny Anderson explains.
Yes, it's very important because it lets the sunlight into the fruits and helps ripen them, sweeten them. It also reduces the chance of getting mildew, allows the sprays to penetrate the plant. Also at this time of year when you're getting close to harvest, you can't use spray, so it can reduce sort of any aphid damage or anything like that on the tips. And as well as that, it keeps the bush nice and compact, helps with the shape. Each of the laterals I'm taking back to 5 leaves from the base. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the tops, once they reach the height that I want them to, I can take them off just above there, probably again at about 5 leaves, and then in winter I'll take it back and shorten it just to the top of the cane. We don't want them going through the top of the net because the squirrels come and eat them and eat their way through the net as well. So.
Think of a summer fruit, and more likely than not, strawberries will spring to mind. A luscious treat that's become synonymous with the balmy days of high summer.
At this time of the year we can remove these runners. These are the runners by which the strawberries are propagated. We don't really require runners on fruiting plants, so with a useful pair of secateurs we can sever the runner right off to the base of the plant like that. To raise our own plants we have a nursery, and we've got runner beds in that nursery. The runners are deblossomed, they are planted 1 metre square, and the runners produce other runners. They fill up the whole square, and we dig that up in August, and we can then select the best plants to plant for next year's crop. But the runners here will only detract energy from the actual plant, so we remove them as we go along. Or if there's a lot of strawberries, we pick the strawberries first, then we can sort the runners out afterwards. And inevitably one will get rot, one will get botrytis, infected strawberries in spite of spraying. So we have to come along and remove the diseased strawberries as we go. When the crop is finished, the straw is removed and the actual foliage is cut down to within 2 or 3 inches of the crown. This will stimulate growth and make sturdy plants which are taken into the second year.
It's more stretching for amateur gardeners to produce fruit trees. Great care is needed, but if certain rules are followed, then the results can be highly rewarding. At Wisley, root stocks are being raised for propagation in the nursery beds. Jim Arbery is about to transfer a required variety onto a rootstock by the process known as chip budding. He takes a well-ripened shoot of the required variety and carefully trims the leaves from it. The next stage is to trim the shoot or bud stick to manageable size. Summer is the ideal time for this procedure, as the sap is active, allowing a good union of bud and rootstock. Jim then slices off a single bud by making a shallow cut just beneath the bud. This requires skill and practice. It also requires a finely honed knife used with extreme care. The bud portion extracted is about 1 inch long and will be set against the rootstock. This second cut should be equal in length to it. It's essential that the 2 cut portions should match as closely as possible. Only with a good match will the operation be successful. The final step is crucial, the tying or sealing of the bud. Crucial for a number of reasons. To keep it in place, of course, but also to ensure close contact of the cut surfaces and to avoid drying out. A special budding tape is used to bind firmly and provide a strong tie. It's every gardener's dream to provide the table with flowers, fruit and vegetables from the garden. The great pleasure that a choice apple, a flower in bloom, or even a humble radish can bring when they're homegrown is out of proportion to the work it takes to produce them. In the vegetable garden at Wisley, one assumption is addressed and shown to be false, that you have to have a big garden to provide for the table. The humblest patio, it seems, can provide a feast.
We've grown a number of varieties here at a dwarf and don't take up much space, so they fit into the containers and look quite neat and don't straggle and are easy to tend. We've also grown things that are tall, so that although we're only taking up a small amount of horizontal space, vertically we're using the space very efficiently with things like runner beans, climbing French beans and climbing squashes.
To many visitors to the garden, it comes as a surprise that they can grow vegetables in such containers.
Yes, I think it does, and I think they're especially surprised at things like root vegetables, which we grow by using shallow-rooted types that aren't going to be distorted by running out of earth. The secret generally is to overcome the two main problems of these containers. One of them is that there's not much soil there, so they soon run out of nutrients and fertiliser. The other is there's not much water there, so they soon run out of water. What we do is we try very hard indeed to keep them well watered, especially in hot weather and especially the tall things. We also incorporate moisture retaining organic matter and moisture retaining gel in the soil, so that helps to retain a reasonable amount of water in between waterings. And we use slow release fertiliser that isn't washed out of the soil when we water it. So as long as they're well fed and well watered and are not long rooted, there's no reason why they shouldn't grow as well here as they do in ordinary garden soil.
The scope of the traditional kitchen garden brought down to a scale more befitting the latter part of the 20th century and the lifestyles of the people who live in it. But we can share a link with the gardeners of yesterday, the taste of homegrown food. While Wisley strives to show its best for every visitor to the gardens, on a day in summer there was an added sense of urgency. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales was visiting Wisley in his capacity as President of the National Council for the Conservation of Plants and Gardens. Prince Charles is a keen and enthusiastic gardener, although he's never been to Wisley before. During his day-long private visit, he showed particular interest in display presentations of this country's national plant collections and in the broad scope of work undertaken by the Royal Horticultural Society. There's a saying in gardening, you should have been here yesterday. Well, not this time. The day of the Prince's visit was the perfect day. Glorious weather with the gardens at their best. And a few tips to take back to Highgrove.
As the long days of summer pass, the exuberance of the roses and the carefully blended hues of the bedding schemes merge slowly into autumn, revealing Wisley in very different clothing. Soon the late flowering bulbs, the Norines, the belladonna lilies and the autumn crocuses will thrust their brightly coloured flowers through the soil, vying in intensity with the bonfire brilliance of the turning leaves of the many trees and shrubs that herald autumn, keep season of mists and mellow fruitfulness.
The video you've just seen is one of 4 presentations chronicling Wisley through the seasons. Wisley Through the Seasons is a unique video collection. The videos represent a superb blend of the beautiful and the instructional. Spring, and the series begins when Wisley's rhododendrons, camellias and azaleas are at their most spectacular. Summer sees the Trials field ablaze with sweet peas and delphiniums, and the rose garden and the broadwalk are at their glorious best. Autumn, the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, is the time to harvest all the previous season's hard work, and a time to celebrate the garden's very special floral fireworks display. Winter and the first frosts mask the beauty and hard work that goes on as the Wisley gardeners prepare for the year ahead. A fascinating combination of practical advice, useful techniques and stunning images. The Wisley Video Collection.